So in this lecture, we're going to be talking about reading fluency. Reading fluency is an integral part of reading instruction and reading well and comprehending our reading. So we've already talked a little bit about phonics assessments and running records in particular. Running records are also a way for us to figure out our students' fluency level. And a running record, basically, which we've already learned, is when a teacher notes everything a student says while reading a passage, including all the words read correctly as well as the miscues or mistakes. Reading level for fluency is 95 to 100% accuracy. Now, some systems will say that fluency independent level is 100%. Others say 99 and so on. As a classroom teacher, I found that when my students could read 95 to 100% of the words accurately, then I felt like their fluency and comprehension their fluency did not negatively affect their comprehension. Now, when they're reading 90 to 94% of the words accurately, they're reading at their instructional level, and when they're reading below 90% accuracy, they're reading at frustration level, and they should never be placed in text at this level. Instructional level is when you have them reading those texts when they're reading with you or with another person who is a more able reader who can provide scaffolding. And we have them reading at their independent level when they're reading alone. So how do we conduct a running record? You gather passages, 3 per grade per level, of 100 to 200 words, and you can have the student read the passage 1 or 2 times orally before you begin the running record. Some do that, some do not. Depending on the amount of time you have, I would say that it's okay to have them not read that passage silently or orally before you begin the running record. And you should sit beside the student when you are assessing them on a running record so that you can see the page of text. You mark a check mark on a blank paper for each word the student says correctly, and you record miscues using notations. That's a very simple way of doing running records. You can also use running records passages that are pre-printed and available for use. You can simply copy a page of text on your copier, and as the student reads, you can mark it up. All of these are ways for you to accurately record a student's reading so that you can figure out their accuracy level. Now, alternative methods for doing running records would be something like when you copy a passage twice and you enlarge it to make the notations, just like we mentioned. Another way would be to get commercially prepared passages, such as what you could get from the website on this slide or readingAtoZ.com. If you print out running record passages for each level, then you can create an assessment kit and use that assessment kit for your students all school year long. Now here you see a sample of a running record that's been marked up. You can see that while the child read on January 28, 2002, that the teacher marked check marks for the words that were read correctly, and they wrote down the miscues and the types of miscues that were made, and then the teacher recorded the accuracy rate by dividing the words that were read accurately by the total words possible. And you can also see that they figured the error rate and the self-correction rate as well. Now when we're looking at miscues, we can look to see which words the students missed based on meaning, syntax, or visual miscues. And those meaning cues, semantic ones, are when you can look and say, did that make sense? Did the passage still make sense the way they read it? With syntax, you say, does it sound right? And with visual, you can say, does it look right? And when you're doing a running record and you're looking at how they made a mistake, You're not giving them cues in the middle of the running record. However, you can say, did they make a mistake that would have made it no longer make sense? That's the most serious kind of miscue. Then you can ask, did they make a mistake that did not make sense based on how it sounded? For example, did they have an incorrect verb form or something like that? And visual, it might make sense the way they read it. For example, they might have read mom for mother, but it doesn't look like the word mother. So it didn't look right to read that. So that's a visual miscue. So we've talked about assessing fluency, but now let's talk about what is fluency. Basically, characteristics of fluency are accurate, effortless, and automatic word identification. And there is a rate or a speed that is considered age or grade level appropriate that we're going to look at in a moment. It's suitable use. When you are reading fluently, you have suitable use of volume, pitch, juncture, and stress in your voice. Those are called prosodic features. Some people who English is not their first language, or some students who come from a home where they've not heard the proper prosodic features in speech may struggle over this. Some students may read fine, but they read so quietly that you can't hear them, or someone else can't hear them. Sometimes they're putting words together in a way that is inappropriate, or they're stressing the wrong syllables in words. A fluent reader will phrase text into chunks. Now, what we have to remember is that fluency is much more than just reading at a certain rate and a certain accuracy level. Those are important components. However, the emphasis on high-stakes testing that has been going on for years now has led many teachers and, as a byproduct, their students to see fluent reading as rate and accuracy, and they don't worry about the prosodic features when they're reading. They try to read as many words as they can within the allotted time, usually a minute. And it's important that we revise our thinking and our students' thinking, if we do see that this has occurred, to make sure that fluency is acknowledged as sounding like a good reader, reading with good prosodic features in your voice. So whenever we think of a fluent reader, the reason that it's so important that our students are fluent readers is that if they have to focus too much of their attention on decoding, which is usually one of the big reasons that their reading is not fluent, then they do not have as much attention to focus on comprehension, and they're tired, their brains are too tired to do so, and they cannot comprehend appropriately. They don't enjoy reading. They don't understand their reading if they're not fluent readers. So back in 2000, the National Reading Panel gave some recommendations. Fluency practice, they said, is most efficient when it is oral, and this makes sense. Also, when a student is reading the same text at least more than 3 times, so 3+ times. It's also most efficient when they're getting guidance or feedback, which may be coming from the teacher or their parent or from a peer. So they're not making errors that are not corrected. We should use independent level text when we're practicing our fluency with our students if their support is low, instructional level text if their support is high, and they need to be practicing fluent reading in all text type, both narrative and expository. And we have to remember that a necessary prerequisite for comprehension is fluency. So whatever system your school happens to be using, you may see something slightly different than what you see on this slide, but typically a first grader should be able to read around 60 words per minute accurately. A second grader, 90 words per minute. A third grader, 115. A fourth grader, 130. And a fifth grader, 145. Now, why don't we have 6th, 7th, and 8th grade on there, or adult readers? That is because someone could read much faster than 145 words per minute. However, their reading would not include the necessary prosodic features, and it's very likely. So we don't try to get our students to read much faster than that. Now, whenever you look at your school system, you will find that there are recommended rates for a first grader at the beginning of the year, the middle of the year, and the end of the year, which is appropriate for each grade level because students change a good deal as the grade level progresses and they go higher in grade. So if we would like our students to focus on more than rate and accuracy, we must assess more than rate and accuracy. And that means assessing expressive reading. This augments, it contributes to the 1 minute sample. And we do that with a multidimensional fluency scale, which allows us to rate our students, to assess them on their volume and expression, their phrasing, their smoothness, as well as their pace. We can even have our students do a self-assessment using a rubric, looking at their strengths and weaknesses, and we can work with them to set goals for their expressive reading. A student fluency self-assessment would look something like this for the primary grades. We have to train them and do lessons, mini lessons on what accurate reading is, what speed or rate they should be reading at, and what expression, good expression, sounds like. Once we've trained them in what these mean, we can use a fluency self-assessment rubric. So after we're done assessing our students, when we find out that they have weaknesses in certain areas of fluency, we can apply fix-up strategies. One of the simplest strategies whenever students are reading inaccurately is to have them slow down. I teach my students to look carefully at the words and letters in the words that they didn't read correctly on the page. I tell them, think about it. If you know this word or parts of the word, try saying the word or word parts. Make the sound of each letter from left to right and blend those sounds together quickly to say the word. Listen carefully to see if the word you said makes sense. Try rereading the word in the sentence again. And after saying the word, use pictures to help you make sure you have the word right if your book has pictures. And if a word still doesn't make sense, you can ask someone to help you. And if you teach students these fix-up strategies for fluency, for accuracy, they will learn to apply them, and this will improve their fluency. So fix-up strategies for rate are important to teach our students as well. One important thing we need to tell them is they should adjust their reading speed to slower if the text is more difficult for them, or if it's something that they're very unfamiliar with the topic, or if they need to get detailed information. Many students, even sometimes our good readers, don't understand that they should adjust their rate and read more slowly in such situations. We teach them that when they are reading a text that is easy or familiar to them, or they're just reading it for enjoyment, it's okay to go a little faster. Now, fix-up strategies for expression would be, one would be to teach them about phrasing, to try to read 3 or more words together before they pause or stop or take a breath. We ask them to try taking a big breath and to read all the way until they get to a comma or an end punctuation before they stop or take another breath. We also teach them to be sure to raise or lower their pitch when they see punctuation marks. We have to explicitly model for them in mini lessons what we do when we come to a question mark or to an exclamation point or to a comma or a period. These are lessons that will help our students be able to read with more expression. So when you think about your fluency instruction and you want to know if you are doing an effective job of teaching fluency, remember that your instruction must be explicit. Teach your students the importance of fluency and how it affects their success as readers. Teach them what fluency is. And it's okay to teach them the academic language regarding fluency. Even very young students can understand the words rate and accuracy and reading with expression. We also need to make sure we're explicitly teaching them to be self-aware of their fluency and to know what to do when they see their fluency breaking down in various areas and how to use fluency fix-up strategies. It's extremely important that you, as the teacher who should be the most fluent reader in the room, do your read-alouds daily and occasionally model non-fluent reading and discuss the difference between fluent reading and non-fluent reading. We also need to allow students to have plenty of reading practice time and access to appropriately challenging materials. If you have a 5th grader who's reading on a 10th grade level, they're going to need more difficult materials to effectively practice their fluency. However, if you have a 5th grader who's reading on a 1st grade level, they're going to need a much lower level text for fluency practice. Additionally, when we are considering characteristics of effective fluency instruction, we need to recognize we must use silent and oral reading. Silent reading of self-selected books without monitoring or feedback does not help our students make gains in fluency. Silent reading with monitoring and feedback in book selection, instruction, and reading widely does help students make gains. So the monitoring and feedback is a key factor, as well as helping our students choose books at the right level. Monitoring and accountability are extremely important. DEAR time, some of you may have heard of, drop everything and read. When the teacher sits down and reads as well as the students, many studies have been done that show this to be an ineffective method. Our students, when we're reading, it may be good for us to read for 2 to 3 minutes or something of that amount of time, but we should be doing quick stop-in visits while our students are doing their independent reading so that we can listen to their oral reading and discuss a piece of literature during silent sustained reading, which should be taking place within a reader's workshop setting. We also need to recognize that repeated reading of the same text is one of the best methods that we can use with our students to help them gain automaticity in their reading. However, once they achieve their grade level automaticity, they need to be reading very widely to improve their comprehension as well. So studies have shown that we should be having 30% instructional time to 70% practice time when we're talking about helping teach our students to be fluent readers. We need to teach them, when we do have our instructional time, what inaccurate reading versus accurate reading looks like, sounds like, and how it affects comprehension. We need to have lessons on reading too fast or too slow versus just right. We need to have lessons on reading without phrasing properly versus with proper phrasing. We need to have lessons on reading without expression in a monotone versus reading with appropriate pitch and stress and suitable breaks, pauses, or stops. We also need to teach our students how reading too loudly or too softly versus reading at a just right volume sounds and why it's important. These are all evidence-based strategies for teaching our students. So repeated reading is one of the best methods to use when you're trying to help your students improve in fluency. You need to start with short, predictable, easy text. Allow your students to feel confident by reading things that are easier for them. You will expand the number of words they can recognize instantly when you let them do repeated reading. You improve their comprehension, their performance, their confidence, their attitude, and it transfers to other text. The words that they're seeing repeatedly in the passage you're working with them on will actually help them read new text better because they will then have those words in their sight word bank. Wide oral reading is another good way for us to help our students develop fluency. Genre wheels are things we can use to help our students to improve reading in many different types of genres. In a genre wheel, we have the different genres we want our students to try on a circle. And we ask our students to, say before the end of a 2-week period, have tried reading in every genre. The children read aloud and receive support, guidance, and feedback and monitoring when they're trying this. Wide oral reading may be more effective than repeated reading, some studies have shown, for second graders and up. Having our students record their reading both at home and in the classroom can help them be sure they are getting the number of minutes they should be getting. It can help their parents see if they're getting the number of minutes they should be reading in per week. Some teachers choose to use reading logs and have their students turn in reading logs, and they give points for reading both at home and in the reader's workshop. There are many types of choral reading which can really help our students grow with fluency. Unison reading is when the entire group reads together. Echo reading is when the teacher or another student reads a passage out loud and everyone else echoes. Antiphonal reading occurs when two groups take turns reading passages aloud. And reading in rounds is when groups read simultaneously but not in unison. They start at different times on a staggered schedule, just like singing in rounds. Now, all of these methods are much better than just doing round-robin reading where one student reads at a time while all the others sit and maybe listen. Now, one of the best ways to have our students practice their fluency is to work with a partner. You can call the partner you can call this time paired reading or buddy reading. Sometimes we have one fluent reader and one who is not. The fluent partner reads, and the less fluent partner attempts to read the same passage, having the same fluency. This may need to occur sentence by sentence or 2 to 3 sentences at a time. Another fluency strategy that you can use in your classroom is scaffolded silent reading. This strategy is when a student would read around a genre wheel, like we talked about a while ago, using self-selected independent level books. And you can have the books in your classroom arranged by level with marking systems such as colored dots or something like that. Or you can have your students use the rule of thumb, which we'll talk about in a moment, to choose books that are at their independent reading level. You do this for 15 to 20 minutes per day. The teacher circulates, randomly stopping and asking students to read aloud, and having a quick conversation with students, asking questions and suggesting ways to share. This happens during our readers' workshop time and is very effective. So what is the rule of thumb? This is a method that works well with books that have quite a few words on a page, such as a chapter book. Basically, you teach your students to find out if a book is at the right level for them to read. They can use their hand. They open up to the middle of a book and they choose a page with a lot of words on it, and they begin reading. They try to read from around the beginning to the end of the page, and every time they come to a word that they cannot read or they don't know, they put up a finger. You can tell your students whatever works for you, but if you tell them how to interpret how many fingers are up, you help them choose books that are on their level. Some teachers will tell the students, if all your fingers go up, in other words, you come to your thumb, then the book is one you should wait on. So that would be 4 words that they didn't know on the page. This works if you have around 100 words per page. So how do we provide differentiation for our students who are struggling with fluency? We have to look at why they're struggling with fluency. Sometimes they're struggling because they don't recognize words. They have high-frequency sight word gaps or gaps in their phonics knowledge. If we find that is the case, then we need to be helping assess what they need to learn in their sight words and phonics, and then we work with them to fill in those gaps. If students are reading slowly but accurately, sometimes it can be because they have vocabulary issues or comprehension issues, and we can work with those slow readers to improve their reading by teaching them vocabulary in advance and by teaching them comprehension strategies. If a child is reading slowly but accurately with good comprehension, it could just be that they've gotten into the habit of reading slowly. You can work with a child in such a case by setting goals and practicing to increase their reading speed. You can also use the neurological impress method, where you read or you have someone read with the student in unison, and the fluent reader who is already reading at a good speed will eventually let their voice get quieter and quieter while the other reader continues to read aloud. If the person who is needing practice begins to read more slowly, then their partner or the teacher, whoever's working with them, begins to read aloud again at the appropriate pace. This can help the student make sure they stay on target with their pace. If you have English language learners in your classroom, once again, you're going to have to check for gaps in their phonemic awareness or phonological knowledge or phonics knowledge, and they're going to need much modeling of oral reading. This can take place when you do read alouds and by having them work with a capable buddy. Now, sometimes our students struggle to be motivated to do repeated readings, especially when we get to the upper grades. Some ways that help provide that motivation are we can use readers theater, which we have some reading on in our course this week. And we can also do radio reading, where we have students perform. They practice reading something out loud and several times, and when they have the piece polished, then we have them read into a microphone or a tape recorder of some kind, and we can even have radio shows that can be used with other classrooms of students or even within your own classroom. The parent-home connection is another important thing for us to leverage when we're working to improve our students' fluency. And one of the most important things that is also very easy that we can tell parents to do is to use closed caption television. Students, if we have the closed captioning turned on when they're watching TV, very often they're attending to the page while they're listening to the words, and all of these words are getting into their memory banks, and this helps them become more fluent readers. Even though we recognize that sometimes the captions are inaccurate or there are little issues, this is a beneficial way to improve our students' fluency and something parents can very easily do for us. FORI, F-O-R-I, fluency-oriented reading instruction, is another method that you can use with your students. It's an integrated lesson framework for providing differentiated instruction and practice in fluency. Basically, there are 3 steps: redesigning a basal or core reading program lesson, free reading period at school, and a home reading program are all important components. And these are steps for fluency-oriented reading instruction and what they would look like over a 6-day cycle.